This is the funniest I've had in the beginning, like 5 minutes of any meetup ever. So I can tell this is going to be a lively group, a lively bunch. I already feel like, wow, these are my people, right? Like in terms of like the topics that I hear everybody talking about, the different triggers and everything like that. So super excited to get into this topic. And what I wanted to do was also let some of my other team members introduce themselves, since we talk agile, we talk about certain topics, and we thought that this topic was perfect for this group. And I'm happy to see the attendance here and everything like that. So I'll start off by letting Armando Calderon introduce himself. He'll pass it on to Michelle. I'll do a small introduction about myself. And full disclosure, we are from Slalom Consulting, and we wouldn't be consultants if we didn't have a deck. So that's the way I communicate with everybody, including my wife. So Armando, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. How are you? As Hector said, I'm an associate consultant at Slalom. I come from manufacturing industry. My history with Agile began when I was doing research and development for a manufacturing company. And we were finding out how every new product that we try to launch, it was always like a year late. So the IT project manager started using some mix between Scrum, XP, and all this, and introduced to me the idea of working iteratively instead of just planning your project, as regular waterfall. So that was my first taste of Agile. I try to implement that in our team, at least some aspects of it, right? At least working in sprints, using stories, no points. Just kidding, we also use points. But after that, I went into a startup. That's when I started getting my certifications. I'm a Scrum Master certified. Then I came to Slalom, and I've been certified. I'm certified in POPM for SAFe as well as SAFe Agilist. So I don't have as much experience as Michelle Hector. So everything that I have in my head is theoretical and very idealistic. So that's pretty much everything I know. Off to Michelle.
All right. Hey, everyone. I think I've met some people here in other meetups. In this meetup, I was at one about 2 weeks ago. Like Hector said, I'm with Slalom. I have been working in the Agile world for a very long time. For me, it started, I started as a project manager. My company was like, hey, let's do this Agile implementation. And I was like, yeah, I want to be the Scrum Master. So I signed up for that. And we had absolutely no idea what we were doing at that time. And I went off and got certified and moved on to many other companies in industry and started building my knowledge and building this career. And, I never looked back. I even use agility in my personal life. I just think it and be it and do it. So excited to be here and excited to support my team. I think this is an amazing topic, and I'm really excited for us to talk about it and to get everybody's input as well. So happy to be here.
Welcome to the dream team.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, Michelle. Bear with me as I'm about to start sharing my beautiful slides here. So let me know if you can see my screen. Perfect. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and get into the topic. We've done some intros. I'll introduce myself. Here's a brief little bio from everybody that just spoke. But a little bit about me. Born in Managua, Nicaragua. Came to the U.S. when I was super young. My first adventures in Agile was to be a product owner, not knowing what a product owner was. I loved it so much that I decided to go into trying to be a Scrum Master. And then throughout the years, I've also been on the development side of the house. So, and that's just purely with Scrum. And then I was also in a SAFe environment for a brief amount of time. And lately, I've been geeking out a lot on Kanban and trying to figure out how to use all of that experience and all of that knowledge along with all the theoretical stuff and utilize it as a coach currently with different clients. what do I want everybody to take away from this discussion? So number one, I want you to stop calculating velocity. So stop what you're doing right there. Stop reading burn down charts and wasting your time with burn down charts. And in general, stop using story points and estimating work with story points. Can I get a thumbs up from everybody in terms of what I want you to walk away with?
Yeah,
Oh,
keep that
I was
screen up.
clapping and yelling, but I was on mute.
Say
Keep
that
that
again?
screen up for a second. Because right now I'm working, and that's exactly what I'm doing, is creating these reports.
No,
Oh,
Jacqueline,
Lord.
no.
I
Was I
see some
just-
people, I see some people,
Stop it.
well, Jacqueline, you're in the right room then.
Yeah,
Can
I
I
just
say
got
something?
yelled at by my manager because I have not been doing the reports, and I'm sitting here right now doing reports for
You
the
tell
last
them
few months.
we say you don't have to do it.
Just
Mom,
tell your manager that Hector said you shouldn't do it again.
Yes.
I want to keep the job, so
Yeah. Send your manager over to me, but you can start doing the things here on the right, and that's in place of this, right? If you're going to stop using velocity and burn down charts and story points, you do have the option. You have many practices that you can get into, but the one that I've become a huge fan of is looking at WIP, and looking at WIP as a key lever to optimizing workflow, looking at cycle time, and then also analyzing throughput. We're not going to get into a lot of detail into all of them. We're going to look at a very, very high level what it means to look at WIP and using WIP as a way, as a main lever that you can control within your teams. Okay. Any questions before we move on?
And can you use those in the start column if you're just starting a sprint, brand new, or at the very beginning of something when you don't have anything set up, like working, the whip, or you just set up your cycle time of how often you want your sprints or whatnot to run.
Yes, I didn't hear you that well, but I just wanted to, what was the question?
Can you use what's in your start doing column if it's brand new team, brand new Scrum Agile to the organization? You don't know what your WIP is at this point.
Correct.
You haven't set a cycle time, or you have just started, just say you just started.
So then you're wondering what to do there if the team is just starting, if you don't have any of this in terms of your cycle time and your throughput. I would say it's very similar to what you would do if you don't have a velocity, right, to start out with, right? You kind of, that's gonna present itself over time. Right? So what have you seen, or anybody else have seen, or what have they done in that same scenario? Because I'm sure that's a pretty common scenario to start out with, right? Teams don't have that set up, so what do they do? Does anybody have any experience with that?
I think if you don't have any histology, right, any historical data, you have to, it's best guess. I mean, I think they rely too much on expecting a new team. You can't, there's nothing to expect, right? In terms of, there is no data. So if there's no data, you have to build that data. So it takes time. So at this point, you best guess.
Yeah.
And keep it moving.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I have to say.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Taz. Sharon, you good?
I'm good.
Awesome. All right. Let's get into the meat and potatoes. Okay. So number one, when I started researching the topic, I started thinking about, all right, well, where did user story points start, and who essentially got people to start thinking about estimating the work in that way? And I ran into a really interesting video that I'm going to ask Nelu to play, but In this video, Ron Jeffries, I'm not going to get into who Ron Jeffries is, but let's just say he's a pretty influential person in the field, which I'm sure of a bunch of you know Ron Jeffries and who he is. And I wanted to play a couple pieces from that video, and it talks about the genesis of story points and how it got started, the story, and then also play a second clip from the same video in terms of what he thinks of story points. So Nelu, I'll ask you to start the video.
Well, I don't promise to tell the story the same way because there's no reason to do that, but it's worth noting that the first XP project, C3, started with a large scale estimate. As it happened, we had a complete set of stories for the whole product because it was a payroll and we thought we knew everything that had been done. And we actually spent just a few days estimating something like 400 stories.
Wow.
And we estimated them all in terms of if I recall correctly, the number of weeks we thought it would take to do that one. And it was usually, you know, 1, 2, 3 weeks, whatever it was. And then we actually divided the team into 2 groups and estimated each half, and then we traded cards and updated and, you know, came.
What happened? Slow?
I think Nelu might have disconnected, guys. Nelu?
Okay.
I'm back. I'm sorry about that. Unfortunately, I disconnected, but I'm going back. Give me a second.
Is under a text from Jacqueline's boss, who doesn't want her to know about story.
Yeah. Says
All
he
right.
wants her to go back to being working on the burn down chart.
Was a
All right.
calculated move.
It was. Okay. So can you see my screen okay? Yeah? Okay. So I'm going to make sure I'm sharing the sound, and I'm going to go ahead and choose back.
Began, estimated each half, and then we actually divided the team into 2 groups and estimated each half, and then we traded cards and updated and, you know, came up with estimates on how long we thought it would take. So it would the product began with estimation at a big scale. In the iteration in XP, the job of the development team is to look at all the stories that are available to be done, the high priority ones, here they are, lots of them, and to choose as many as they think they can do. This many, we can do this many, and do them. Now again, we would focus much more on solution, on problems and less on solutions today, but that's what we did. So, and in case of payroll, we knew exactly what each one was anyway. And so you have this need to say, well, there's 1,000 stories or, you know, million stories. How many can we do this week? And what we took to doing, and I don't remember quite why, was we started taking each story as it, you know, was brought to us in the planning, and we would associate it with what we called ideal days. We would say, how many ideal days would it take me to code this? And very quickly, since we were in this product, we knew how long, we had a good sense of how hard they were to do. And an ideal day to us was a day when they left us alone, didn't call us to any meetings. You know, nobody, whoever was working on it wasn't sick. It was a perfect day. The manager never showed up. You know, that's sort of an ideal day. And so, and because every programmer has that sense, every programmer wants to say, if you bastards would leave me alone, I could do that in 2 days.
Yeah.
And they never do leave you alone, but they want to say that. So we used those ideal days, and then we tracked how many ideal days worth of work we got done in 2 weeks, or 3 weeks. Actually, for a long time we were doing 3-week iterations. How slow we were back then. So we would count how many ideal days we got in 15 real days, times the number of programmers. Well, it turns out it takes about 2 or 3 real days to get an ideal day. Because of all the friction that goes on in the work, and probably because of some innate bias in your estimation, where you think in 2 perfect days I could do this, and it would take 3 days anyway, because you're too optimistic, whatever. And so basically there was like a ratio of 3 between the days we said we could estimate and the days we took to get things done. And that was very confusing to management, particularly to the ones who would only come by every now and again. They would say, well, you said this was going to take 3 days and it took 10 days. You said this was going to take 3 days and it took 7 days. You said, what's wrong? What's wrong with your estimation? They kept asking. So our response to that was we started calling them points. And then it was easy to say, it takes about 3 days to do a point. There's a 3-point story, it's going to take about 9 days. It was the same number to the programmers. We just named it points. And well, then we would add up the points on the stories, and we would say, well, we're doing about 30 or however many we were doing. But this week, Chet's on vacation, and we got that big meeting, so let's take 25, and we take 25, and it would be pretty close. So the story point really started just to obfuscate this relationship between a made-up number, the ideal days, and the actual elapsed time.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Now, and they worked fine for us. They worked just fine. Somewhere right along there, either I came up with the saying, you could call them gummy bears and it would work, or Joseph Pellrine came up with the saying, you could call it gummy bears and it would work. I don't know which. I think it was.
All right.
So
So
we seem to be experiencing some video difficulties. Yeah, and to kind of back up what he was saying, Hector, yes, it was Joseph Pellrine. He's one of the folks that I mentored under, and he told me the same story about the gummy bears. So it is gummy bears.
yeah, which, and I find it interesting that, Ron Jeffries goes into, talking about, how the genesis of it. And when I listened to that, I said, wow, that's really interesting. But then as I started looking at the rest of the video, I'm gonna ask Neilu to play the part where he talks about he talks about its misuse and a suggestion of not using them.
Sure, let me go ahead and share that.
Yep.
Let me know, please, when you see my screen. All right, I'm sharing. Okay. There we go. Hold on. Can you hear it? Okay. Yeah. Okay.
That whole notion, even the ideal days, which we intended to be an internal measure that we, the team, would just use. We would just talk about it. We'd say, I do that 2 damn days, I got 3 days. I could do that 1 day. And we just would say, okay, and we'd use that and figure out how many stories we were going to do. And it was going to be a chat between us. But as soon as that bubbled up to some management level, it became a measure. And then it became a target. And it's like, no, the target ought to be the software. It ought to be, let's look at the software. So that is why I have looked favorably on the no estimates movement, if it's a movement, or noise, if it's noise.
Yeah.
Because I think at the scale of what you do this week, which is where story points really came from, you don't need it. You want to just cut your stories down till they're all about the same size, like a day. That's generally always possible. And count how many you're getting done. Hey, we're getting about 20 stories done a week. Good, that's, makes sense. 2 weeks later, you're getting like 17 stories. You start thinking, what's happening? Are we slowing down, or are the stories changed?
Yeah.
The trick you trigger the team to look back and say, what's going on? And you figure it out. And you say, well, what's going on is we're having too many bugs to fix. Because we don't get story points for bugs because we already got the points for that one. I don't think we've been refactoring enough, and that whole area with the database is getting really hard to work with, and it slows us down.
Yeah,
So you use
that's going up.
a flow to trigger a retrospective, to trigger an inspection.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect, Nelu. I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. All right, let me know when you guys can see my screen.
I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So I found that video super helpful and super useful to, number one, understand the genesis of story points and how they began to become used, and then also the misuse in terms of like once it started bubbling up to management, and then essentially what Ron Jeffries thinks in terms of like getting into no estimates. Now, there is an alternative that I talked about, and that's on the start column. An alternative that I'm suggesting is to use WIP. We'll get into that a little bit later, but an exercise that I was going to have everybody do that I'm not going to have everybody do right now, because actually I want to do I want to look at something else, which you see here, these two charts, and that exercise was going to be to look up in the Scrum guide. There's a link to the Scrum guide here, but you can easily get to the Scrum guide and then do a search for points, velocity, burn down, estimates. You don't find anything in there in the Scrum guide, right? And you may find, I think there's a word in there around capacity in the Scrum guide. So I know a lot of people, when I talk to them and I start talking to them about user story points and thinking about the end of their use in their current Scrum teams, they look at me sideways and say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not agile. You should be using story points, or your team is you don't know what you're talking about. So that's some other research that I ended up doing and taking a look at the Scrum guide and trying to validate how true that was. But before I even got there and before I even started thinking about this, where I ran into it was actually by when I started reading about Kanban, and I started reading Actionable Agile Metrics by Daniel Volcanti, and started looking at other practitioners that were not a big fan of story points. But what got me to start thinking about that and looking at Actionable Agile metrics and looking at other ways to measure is by looking at velocity charts and looking at burn down charts. And if you notice here, I have a burn down chart here on the right where you see the sloping line, and then you see the actual burn down chart. Looks like a hockey stick, okay? How many of you that look at burn down charts see a similar pattern from sprint to sprint where it looks like a hockey stick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, and it's mainly, and it's a lot of it has to do with data entry. And I've run into countless amount of teams as a Scrum Master where the developers get to the last day of the sprint, you let them know, I'm going to close the sprint down in Jira, and then boom, all of a sudden the work gets done. But that's not true. The work is getting done over time. They're just not updating their user stories. And now you're looking at a burn down chart and thinking to yourself, wow, we always get stuff done at the end of the sprint. No. We all know that's not true, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So, and Jacqueline, you're seeing that as well?
Yep. And I know exactly what's going on because I'm on the daily stand-up with them. So I know they're not closing their tasks. Sometimes they don't add the task until the last minute when I'm like, you guys, come on, we need to close these stories, and then they do it. So of course, we look like we fall off a cliff.
Right. And to me, what's the big deal, right? If they're not updating their user stories till the last day, but yet they're still delivering, right?
What is the big deal? I say the same thing too, so.
Right, not necessarily a big deal, but I have run into programs and other initiatives where it is a big deal, and people start thinking like, hey, that team is not necessarily doing what they need to do. And then we get into the whole conversation around like, the team is doing a lot of work. In fact, it's just not reflected in your burn down chart.
Yep.
So what insight are we actually getting from the burn down chart? Right? Something to think about. And then what are we getting from a velocity chart? Like what are these things actually telling us about the team, about how the team is working? We don't even know, we can't even tell if there's a bottleneck anywhere in a process that the team is using, anywhere between JIRA statuses or anything like that, right? Like these are not even good, in my opinion, lagging indicators to anything, right? So this is where, you know, I've done everything in my power to kind of show everybody why you should stop using story points, stop looking at velocity charts. Number one, we started looking at the genesis of story points, right? It's not in the Scrum guide. And then we're not necessarily getting insights from a burn down chart or a velocity chart. So what I wanted to do was get into breakout sessions and breakout rooms and talk about what would be the impact to your Scrum team if you stop using story points. Now, we're gonna break up into groups of 2 to 3 people per breakout session.
You really want to do that?
And I want you to stand on either side. You could be pro story points, or you could be pro not using story points. It doesn't have to be your real opinion, but I want you guys to discuss it from you choose whichever perspective you want to talk about. We're going to break out into sessions. I'm going to go into the different sessions just to kind of check in and pop in and see what you guys are talking about and get into the whole thing. And you might have experience now using points, and you might already be there. I would challenge you to take the different stance, right, that you're already used to in whichever case. Okay, so what is the impact to your Scrum team if you don't use story points? Choose a side. Okay, I'll ask Neilu to break out everybody into the breakout rooms.
All right, everyone, you have been assigned. So please feel free to go to your breakout room. All right, so I'm gonna if you cannot go to your breakout room, let me know. Okay, so I can like send you there. There you go.
I'm going to stick around here with you, Hector, because as a CST, I might skew your curve. Okay.
Lou, what's my room?
Yeah, you need to go to a room, Godwin. You need to go to your room.
Godwin, you're in room number 3. Go
Room
ahead.
number 3.
Yeah.
What room am I in, Nelu?
Is that Taz, right?
Yes, Taz.
All right, Taz. Sorry, you're room number 5.
Awesome.
Okay.
I can't even see the room, so you take me there. Take me to my
Send him
room.
there. Just send him there.
Go. Click on join. Click on join.
Send him there. Yeah. Yeah.
You were saying,
we should talk, Hector. We should talk. Yeah, because one little tidbit, when you quote the Scrum guide, something I know a little bit word for word, because I'm the translator of the guide to Spanish.
Oh, wow.
For the last 11 years. So, yeah. Yeah, and I know what they're referring to when they refer to certain things there, because they're only useful, A, within the team, B, to assess your own current plan towards your goal. Okay. They do not intend for you to use them for necessarily forecasting. They're not necessarily intended for you to use forecasting. Velocity, potentially you could use depending on how stable your organizational environment is. If there's a lot of organizational noise around your team, okay, then using a beta distribution is as good as anything else. Because unless you solve the problem of organizational noise, velocity becomes useless. Why are you able to use velocity on your vehicle? Why? Because your wheels are aligned, the road is relatively straight, okay? Hopefully your road is relatively smooth, and you're paying attention to what you're doing behind the wheel. Stability. Stability. If you don't have stability, velocity starts to become meaningless. So, yeah. So yeah, and stuff. So I didn't want to go into a breakout room because there's lots of reasons why you see hockey sticks and lots of things that you should be doing as a scrum master or a coach if you were seeing hockey sticks. So regardless of whether you do or you don't, and so anyways,
and this is, and I do realize that there's definitely a lot of I mean, there's a bunch of different patterns that other teams are seeing, right? Outside of just the hockey stick, right?
And that's why I'm glad you're making them think. Glad you're making them think, because they should think. Everybody should think. Hell, I think.
And again, like this is a skewed in the direction of like being kind of like getting into the extreme side of the conversation, right?
Which sometimes they need, Hector. Which sometimes they need. Okay. They need a little bit of a slap in the face. Just kidding. I'm just non-violent, but non-violent. But sometimes they need a little. Hey, this stuff happens. You know? This stuff happens. Yeah. I have been trying to vote the burn down chart out of the Scrum Guide for close to 10 years. Haven't gotten close yet, but I'm working on it. But at least I got I didn't, but we got the 3 questions out of the Scrum Guide finally.
Oh, wow.
Never to return.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's major.
People use them as recipes. And it's like, no, it's an idea. You're supposed to figure out how to do it better. But no, people got into habits.
Yeah. I mean, I made that, like, that was one of my habits, was like, be Scrum Master, get onto the daily, and then get into the 3 questions, right?
Yeah.
And I did that for a while, right? Until I started thinking like this isn't doing anything, like asking these questions like this. And then I started realizing, like, why are these stand-ups going the way they are? Or why are the daily scrums essentially not yielding much of anything from the team?
Simple. Goal. Okay. The way I teach the daily scrum is very simple. You're there to answer one question. It's the question that Pinky and the brain ask. Gee, brain, what are we going to do today? The same thing we do every day, Pinky. Try to get closer to the goal. What needs to happen to get closer to the goal? It doesn't matter what happened yesterday. Today is another day. What needs to happen today? Answer that question as a team.
Yeah.
That's it. If you can't answer that question, that's your problem to solve. Solve the problem.
Yeah.
Some of you are going to stop working on what you were working yesterday. Some of you are going to start working with other people who you weren't working with yesterday. Some people are going to work on something completely different than what you were working on yesterday. But that's the point.
Yeah, it's super interesting, right? Because it's essentially asking the team to focus.
Correct, and that's the whole idea. Believe it or not, that's the whole idea. It's focus.
And I've run into where you have people that don't necessarily understand what is supposed to come out of the daily scrum. When they see that, they're like, what are you guys actually discussing? Why aren't you talking about status or anything like that?
That's not the point.
Like, the status is on the JIR tickets. We don't need to discuss that.
If you get into Bank United and you get yourself access into our knowledge base and stuff like that, I actually wrote an article for our knowledge base that says that the daily scrum, it's not a status meeting.
Right.
Explicitly, it's not a status meeting.
Yeah.
And I actually outlined what you can do to prepare beforehand so that it is not a status meeting, what you can do during so that you make sure that it doesn't become one. Okay. And then how to run it.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different finicky things that are all involved to make this stuff work. I think when in Ron's video, and I hope they go back and we should share the link with him again, because he had, okay. And by the way, this is not the first time that he's actually said what he said. So the stuff that Dan talks about in his book, not new, not mind blowing. I've heard Ron say this 16, 17 years ago, that if you try to make your things as evenly sized as possible, okay, they'll all get through the pipe evenly. And then you count, and then you count, and that's it. And I don't remember if he used like a, I don't know if he used a Pringles can or he used a tube. Okay, he used a tube and a ping pong ball. And he goes, if everything's the size of a ping pong ball, everything goes straight through, right? And that's when the light bulb goes off in your head. Oh. So the challenge is, how do you get everything to be or as close as possible to a ping pong ball?
Yeah.
Okay. Or whatever the pipe or whatever diameter the pipe is able to fit. So, you know.
That's a really, like, it's easy to relate an idea of looking at user stories in that context, right? How can we work as a team getting things that size so we can go through our value stream?
Absolutely. And then the other thing I would recommend is go look at something called the team swarm.
Which, say that again?
The team swarm.
Yeah.
It's a scrum pattern. It's a scrum pattern. The idea is that when you look at your plan, you say, okay, what story can we load up as many people as possible to get that thing done? Okay, great. Who's left over? How many people can we load up on that story to get that next story done? And you keep doing that until you run out of people and you let them go. And when they're done with that thing, you ask them again, okay, how many people can load up on this thing and how many people can go help the other people working on the other stories? And then you let them go and you get them into the habit of coming together and splitting apart and coming together and splitting apart as they need to.
Yeah, and that's a super cool point, because my experience in working with teams is usually, let's say you have a data visualization specialist who doesn't do any data engineering. Then you have a data engineer that doesn't do any data visualization. Wow. There are some people that do that they can overlap, right? And expressing to them where it's getting them to swarm is I've had a lot of difficulty getting teams to understand that and getting people's managers to understand the swarming concept.
Okay. The idea there is to understand the plug. And what I mean by the plug, the interconnect between the data architect and the visualization engineer. Okay, where is the connection point so that when one's done with that, they can run? Okay, what's that point? Get them to talk about what that point needs to look like. Guess what? They're automatically start talking about the stuff that's in common to them, so that the person who needs to get something ready understands what the other one needs. The other one understands what they should be receiving and can understand more about the challenges this person has in getting the data that way. Okay, creating that empathy between the two of them is crucial. Okay, and maybe once you're inside of Bank, if you ever come into Bank United, I'll show you the CFDs of some of my teams. They look like railroad tracks.
Sorry to interrupt you. Should we get everyone back?
It's Hector's call.
Absolutely. Let's hear what people were talking about.
Great chat, Hector. Thank you so much.
Yeah, but I definitely want to catch up with you, Marcelo. I
sure.
I have tons of questions.
Absolutely.
People should be here in the next 40 seconds.
All right. All right, people are coming back.
Well, curious to see what they came up with.
I'm trying to grow a beard like you, Marcelo. It's gonna come soon.
No, you don't. No, you don't. Especially since I'm planning beard 2.0.
What is that?
You'll see.
All right, man. I'm excited.
You'll see.
What's wrong with your beard, Marcelo?
Nothing is wrong with my beard. I'm simply taking it to the next level.
How long have you been growing that out?
I've had this beard like this for at least 6 years.
What's the next level in beard growing?
See, now that would be telling.
All right, everyone, welcome back.
I have
Welcome back.
decided to grow a beard in honor of Marcelo, so you guys will see my beard show soon.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
coming.
Welcome back.
I can't grow a beard.
You just gave me the
Welcome
perfect
back.
metaphor to use at the next user story discussion, which is growing beards. How on earth
my
are you going to
gosh.
compare growing beards velocity?
Well, welcome back. Let's give the floor back to Hector. Take it away, Hector.
All right, awesome. Let's hear what people were talking about, and let's hear for people for story points, right? What would the impact be to your Scrum team if you stopped using story points? What discussions were people having around that?
You want me to go? I'll go first. What did we say
Absolutely,
again?
please.
We talked about that, story points is we're assigned story points based on level of effort. So the story point tells me how much work will have to go into a specific story. So if someone rates a story 20 points, well, we never go that high, like 13 points, it gives me the incentive as the PO to break the story down and say, okay, then it's too big. Let's break it down. And, multiple developers will be able to work on the different stories. That's one of the 4s. We've got some 2s, but I'll wait for other people to come, because even as I'm saying it, the against is popping into my head. But that's it. Yeah. That's what we talked about.
Yeah. So you were saying, as you were saying, what pops into your head?
Against what I just said.
Okay, and so then what do you truly feel? Are you for or use of them coming into the call?
Look, anything that will prevent me from doing dashboards, I'm happy. But as of right now, we have to do story points because it's what my company does, and I have to ask number of story points. And then if it's too big, it's additional work for me because I have to break it down and regroom the story, and we talk about it again, and then we assign points. So but it's just more work for me personally. So that's it. But I don't care if we have story points or not, because the team is really they're developing and we're delivering. And I work for Deloitte and I work in tax, so it's very easy for our customers to say, whatever it is that we developed, served whatever your purpose, and they have stats. So that statistic, I think, is way more important than the statistic that I'm given about the team and its performance on this dashboard. So that's why I'm reluctant to do the dashboard, but I'm being forced. So that's it. But I'm against story points, actually. Why? The team is working. They're doing stuff. We can tell. You know what I mean? And then stories are broken down into tasks, and the developers have to put tasks on their stories. That's why that stupid burn down chart just drops off the cliff, because that's when, at the last minute, when I'm yelling and screaming, is when they finally go in and put it in so I can close the story right before the iteration ends or the sprint ends if you're not using safe. And so it's just more work for me. So sorry, I'm yelling my frustration. So I'll shut up now. I'll go on mute. Thank you.
No, you have a support group here.
I think we could go both ways. Talking about story points or no story points. If you have a Kanban team that a story stays there for like 5-6 days. So let us say you use story aging, you use a banana to put it there to see how long it stays on one row. Then as a Scrum Master, you're not doing your job. It still comes down to the point of story pointing. And so if you have a team that you do not have a holistic, good definition of done, you're going to be sizing stories in the 8, in the 13, and people would arbitrarily be throwing numbers out there. So if you coach the team to be able to break down the stories to the minimal part, 2s and 1s and 3s, and don't think about days, how long it takes, think about the complexity, think about the risks, and think about the effort involved, then that team will know that they are not living on story point, but they are living on delivering. And at the same time too, don't be a stick up for burn down. I mean, there's a gadget in Jira that says sprint health. You could use that and coach them every day. We're on day 9 of the sprint. No story has been done. We're still on 0% completion. I should be seeing some percentage moving here. And so that is my discussion. I don't use velocity. I don't use burn down. I just talk to them as the days are going. Even in the stories, there are dots there that tells you how many days this story has stayed in to do or in progress before going. And so it just depends on where you are with your team. The team could size very well, and then they have UAT with business, keeping them 3 days before they are tested. So just do your job, and whether you're sizing or you're not sizing, just be on top of it. That's what I say.
think too. That's what I think too. But how do you get management to go along with that? They like numbers.
So I mean, I hear what you guys are saying, right? But from going back into your question to management, right? So managing those expectations on when a feature is going to be completed, right? I think that's really the value that the story points and velocity brings to me, right? Like, I know, our team has a certain velocity, right? If we continue, it's going to fluctuate up and down. Maybe, some sprints will get a little bit higher, some sprints will get a little bit lower, but, it'll be some kind of running average, right? I think we could use that as a ballpark estimate to say, okay, this feature is going to take us 3 sprints or 4 sprints or whatever the case is for it to be completed, right? I think there will have to be something equivalent to that in order for me to say, hey, we don't need story points, but I know exactly how long this feature is going to be completed, and we could move on to something else. If not, it's sort of Hector, I don't know if there's anything. I know that you mentioned throughput, right? But I'm not capturing that. Maybe it's just a mind shift, right? Like, I'm so used to the story points and velocity. So
yeah, and that's fine, Orlando. But that's why we're talking about it. Go ahead, Tess.
No, throughput is about what you get done, right? Estimation of velocity points has nothing to do with what you're getting done. It has to do with the story in terms of effort and complexity and in relation to another story. That's it. It has nothing to do with what you're trying to get done or what you're going to get done as far as throughput. I'm talking in relation to throughput.
Yeah, and it has
I actually asked the director in one of my teams today when he kept saying we need to increase the velocity, and I said why? And I asked him, why do we need to increase the velocity? He's like, I said, I just need you to tell me why we need to increase the velocity. And he kept going round and round and round. And I said, I can increase that velocity for you in 1 sprint. And what will that show you? He's like, it shows me they're walking. I'm like, no. I make all the stories 8 points, and it's going to shoot up the velocity. Within 3 sprints, they'll be at 30, 35. But it doesn't show they're working.
Yeah.
That's true.
And he kept quiet. That was it.
Exactly. Tell me how you're going to measure me, and I will punk you.
Yeah, and I'll tell you how I will react.
Yep.
And behave.
Exactly.
And one thing, so Michelle, you wanted to make a point, and then after Michelle, after you make your point, I'm going to check in with you, Orlando, and kind of get to your question. So go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, I think I heard somebody say like it's showing the value, like estimates are showing the value of like what you've delivered, and I don't necessarily believe or agree with that, because I think value is like, is it being used, right? Like, that's how value is measured, not through velocity or story points.
Yes, ma'am.
It's what went to production, and is the customer delighted and happy?
Yes, ma'am. Agree.
So those velocity measurements don't measure value. It's just measuring team, how fast the team is working, which is, to Hector's point, I think it can be misleading.
Yep.
Yeah. So
I agree
Orlando,
with you.
So you're saying, Orlando, that you're used to using story points, and then get it, like, in terms of the way it helps you, if you got rid of them, you kind of would feel vulnerable in not being able to like see work that's being done.
Yeah.
Am I hearing that properly?
Not so much work that's being done, but I would say more being able to manage those expectations on when certain items are going to be completed, right? Because, sorry, go ahead.
So then the point for you, like in terms of using points, you're seeing that they help you determine when something is going to get done.
Right. Yeah.
And what other folks are saying is that, like that they wouldn't, like that story points don't help you with that. That's one. They don't help you to, say when something is getting done. And then also what people are saying is that, for instance, people can fudge those numbers, right? Orlando, let's say for whatever reason, you're the scrum master and you're showing the team like, hey, in the past 3 sprints, we didn't have that many, we didn't complete that many story points, right? And then the developers say, oh, is it story points that we need to like hit? Cool. To Godwin's point, why don't we jack up the
Bump it
numbers
up.
on all the
Yup.
story points?
Yeah.
So not so much to so I get that, right? And I think also the estimate's different from team to team, right?
Yep.
Like for example, I think someone said the example of having a team full of seniors, right? Their stories are going to be 3s and 2s for everything because they've been there a long time, they know how to do the work. While if it's a younger team, it'll be 8s and 5s and who knows what. So it differs from team to team. I get that. So more velocity doesn't mean more work getting completed, right? I understand that. But in the context of a team, right, where you have some sort of established velocity, you could say, hey, as our team now, we're sort of, pushing 20, whatever that means, right? 20 points per sprint. We could do some type of estimation there on some type of work that's going to be completed.
And Orlando, if you're doing that, right, you're saying we're going to deliver 20 points. Does that mean you're delivering value?
No, but this is so.
It's just a hypothetical question. It's not me like questioning you.
No, it's okay. But I guess this is a different conversation from value because I completely agree, right? Value is, what are we delivering to the end user? Is there value? That's a completely different question. I'm coming from a point of view from a time management point of view or from a estimation of work being completed point of view, not so much value, right? Like
some people are using it though to
and also think about technical debt too while you're thinking about that.
Well, yeah, that's included there as well, right? So yeah.
Can I ask you guys a question?
The technical debt measures different than a feature.
Yeah.
So now you're looking at, you're comparing a sprint where you had a lot of technical debt to which really the customer doesn't see that value,
Right.
although, maybe the website's a little faster.
They
And then
justify by what's
feature,
missing.
Yep. One second here. I wanna make sure that and Victoria, we're gonna come back to your point. Alex, you had a quick question?
I just have a question for the team, like regarding story points, right? You're a scrum master. Right now I'm a coordinator, so I want to learn from everyone. So let's say you're a scrum master. It has 8, the certain action item has 8 story points. According to however your story points, 8 story points might be a large effort, might take you this amount of days. Are you going to go to business and you're going to tell them, hey, this is going to take, if they're asking, hey, this is going to take so-and-so days, and already set the expectation for them? Or are you going to tell them, okay, we are in progress, we're going to test this, we're going to develop this, there might be some defects, and not give them a date until we get to 100% testing in a lower environment or something? It's just a question that I want to know. How would you handle that?
can I jump in?
Go ahead.
Go for it, Victoria.
Okay, so our business contacts are involved in our planning. So we start talking MVP. What can we give you that will give you immediate value for the customer? And then how are we building on it? And we have to plan that build, because a lot of times you give the MVP and you don't get to the rest. And MVP being the minimum viable product, what am I handing over as a development team to the business or to our customers and saying, this will give you some value, you'll use it, it'll work. It may not be everything, but you'll get a taste and you'll want more. But you have to go back to it. So you have to plan those other iterations in, and then your business partner will see, because they're partners, because they're in the conversation, that slowly but surely, we're going to get more of that feature in, and we can measure the customer response along the way, and we will know when to stop.
Okay.
That's how it works in my environment.
Got it. And Alex, does that help, or we just probably need to have another conversation to get more in depth into unpacking your question?
No, that does help. I just hate, giving a date, especially where I work, where it's a little bit different. I hate giving a date to business, and we don't meet that because things happen, like, defects occur. It takes time. Who knows how long they're going to be fixed? The team is working on it, throwing more resources on it. And then business is like, okay, well, you told me this, like, you know, you're going out of your word is not there and it looks bad. I just want to know how.
But if they're part of the conversation, then
Right.
as you run into those roadblocks, they'll know.
Right.
Yes,
And their
yes.
expectation gets reset.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've agreed to that MVP, so they're watching and waiting for that to show up, and then you can gauge the rest of the work based on what it took to get that first portion completed.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Then they
Let's do-
usually have an idea that the team is killing themselves to get the stuff done.
Yeah, they see it.
Right.
If they're
But-
involved, they see it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry.
No, not a problem. We have 4 minutes left, and we didn't get into the
Oh, Lord.
the topic of what we could start doing in place of story points, which is fine, because what I wanted to do is hear from one last person, whether you're for or against, and then we'll we'll wrap up since we're coming right on at time. Anybody else want to chime in here in terms of what they were discussing, whether they were for it or against it?
Got Maro's hand up.
Hello. My name is.
Hey, Maru.
I think it's not with like. Hello.
Yes, yeah. Maru, go ahead.
Munir Maru is, I believe, speaking. I guess first. I guess, right?
Oh, sorry about that. Sorry.
Oh, thanks, guys. Yeah, just want to share 2 points, two out of many points that Michele, sorry, keep saying it in Italian, Michelle, and oh, she left. Okay, there was another Lean Six Sigma lady with us in the group who raised many interesting points. Two I'd like to share was one, very few teams managed to give estimations of measures of quality that plays a role in when you're talking about work or results, or I don't even want to get into outcomes or outputs. That's not the only thing teams are being measured on. And the other thing is, normally when you look at any types of measurement represented as a graph, so that's visual, normally, even if you give it to a primary school child, he will first try to understand what that actually means about how the system is working and what that should make him think about how to make things better, right? I want to ask you the question, how many times did you see that being done to any kind of even trivial chart like a burnout chart? How many times did you see people looking at these things and say, hey, how can I make things better? I feel like they have become just a commodity, a rite of passage through the sprint to be done with and throw it over the wall.
Agree. Agree.
Very interesting. Very interesting. All right. So in the interest of time, what I wanted to do was I'm not going to touch on WIP only because it's a bit of it's a topic that probably needs to be discussed in a separate session. And I mainly wanted to get into the genesis of story points and have a discussion amongst everybody, because we do have some folks here that are used to using story points and getting rid of, like, story points provide them some value, but then we have other folks that are saying, story points are not necessarily all that important. So I wanted to then ask Marcelo and also Neilu, to kind of, how do we wrap things up, right? Because I feel like we had some really healthy debate, probably in the breakout rooms and then also here. I'm just being cognizant of people's time now that we're at 7:15.
Need a continuation of this discussion.
Yeah, well, we're up to 7:30, so you still have like 10 minutes and then 5 minutes so we can have, the wrap up. So.
Oh, perfect. Okay. For some reason, I thought it was 7:15 in my mind, but let's do this then. Let's get into talking about WIP. So I will share my screen. Just bear with me. All right, are you all able to see my screen?
Yes.
And I'm actually going to exit full screen mode here because I need to play around with this chart here, okay? Are you guys still able to see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen. Let it flow.
Perfect, perfect. All right, so what can you do in place of using story points? Again, this is one of different practices that I'm a big fan of, and that's looking at cumulative flow diagrams. So how many people here have used cumulative flow diagrams or CFDs?
I have.
I have to learn this because I'm getting trained to be a really trained engineer, very safe, and this is what I have to start to use when I get to that role.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, so I don't know what tool you use currently. I use Jira. I'm a Jira monkey, just by force. And Jira, this is an out-of-the-box functionality that comes out of Jira. And if we look at the very basic settings, or rather the very basic components to a cumulative flow diagram, let's take a look at it, and then let's take a look at the point that I'm making where we can look at WIP as one of our major levers that we can control within the team. So let me expand this so we can actually see it a little bit better. Let me make this a little smaller, get this out of the way. Okay, so let's take a look at a simple cumulative flow diagram, or CFD. And let's say that these three strands right here that are color coded are 3 different processes. Okay, so we have the to-do process, we have the in progress, and let's say we have done. And you'll see in here that we have things that are entering the to-do, and then things that are being completed, which is the departure, and that is in the done color band. And when you look at right now, currently, like I've worked with teams where we'll have, in Jira, we'll have like 6 or 7 different buckets. One of those buckets might be the backlog bucket, and usually I turn the backlog button off, or like that bucket off, so that we're not seeing that as a color band. And then we just look at everything within what is arriving, what the team is committing to. And then I look at what the team is committing to all the way to what the team is completing. All right. So in here, we have only 3 buckets. And in here, what I want you to focus on is when you look from one strand up to the other one, we see that this is the work in progress. And then when it comes to talking about how long something takes, generally, right, just how long something takes to get from one part of the process to the next process, we're looking at average cycle time. I'm not going to get into the average cycle time or what the throughput looks like, but I want you to focus on looking at this and understanding that this is your WIP. This is your work in progress within that process. We have user stories being completed here, and we have this as being time. So what you're looking at here is work being done over time. Can I get a thumbs up on that, or do we have any questions on just the basics of the?
Yeah, I use this quite a bit, obviously, with working with Kanban teams quite a bit. But I'm curious. I know you said you turn off your to-do, right? So you're not looking at your average band from your middle, which is where the work is in process, to the work that's to do, right? If you got 2 very uneven, bars, right, at the to-do and the middle, which is the work in process, does that not tell you something? Do you not use that as sort of, data to prove that maybe there's some kind of bottleneck going on, or I'm curious why you turn off the to-do, and so you don't then compare it to the to-do that you have, the things that the teams have to do versus the things that are currently in process. And my question is, I often see very small, inside the work in process can be very small, right? An average to what is in to do. But if you don't have to do on turned on, you can't really see that. So I'm just curious what your thought process is for trying to assess maybe there's some kind of bottleneck going on.
So for instance, when I look at a cumulative flow diagram, I look at how thick the bands are, and it's true that like in many instances, I'll look at a cumulative flow diagram and see that a lot of bands are thin, right? And then first off, visually what I cue in on is looking at where the bands are thicker, right? And then where I see, for instance, if this band was a lot thicker than what we see here in comparison to, let's say, here or here, right? I would then start looking into what's taking so long. Why is there so much whip, in that particular bucket? And that bucket could be, I don't know, it could be QA, it could be, development, it could be whatever value stream the team has mapped out for what each bucket means, right? That's where I would focus in on. That's what tells me that there could be a bottleneck within that bucket. And then I will bring the cumulative flow diagram to a retrospective and discuss that with the team. And sometimes what I found with teams is that maybe they need to break that bucket down into 2 separate buckets or 3 separate buckets, right? That's one example of that I've run into where I see that. And then once we start breaking it down into separate buckets, you don't see the thickness, right? You might then see the thickness into, let's say you broke it down into 3 different buckets. You might see the thickness in the first, one of the 3 components that you broke it down into.
Okay. Yeah, I just was saying, if it's a fairly newer team, I always try to keep the to-do turned on so that we can sort of talk about the difference between the thicker versus the thinner pieces of or stages of the work that you're doing. So anyway, keep going.
Yeah. And Taz, I don't know if anybody else is having a tough time hearing you.
I'm sorry, repeat that. Did you say?
Yeah, I'm having a tough time hearing you.
Oh, my apologies. That's okay. Keep going for sake of time.
I was able to hear.
Yeah, me too.
Daryl wanted to say something. Do you have your hand up?
Yes, Daryl's been waiting for a while.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. No, I thought it goes off automatically after a few seconds. But no, but I mean, I did have something to say about this because I guess it does give you an opportunity to hone in on which part of the process, is taking longer. But it's still, to me, these cumulative flow diagrams, they don't give you detail. Like you could still even go to the team. Why is this happening? They're like, I don't know. It may be a way to kind of shine the magnifying glass in and kind of focus on an area, but it still doesn't explain why ever.
Yeah, I found a hard time explaining this chart in a way that they can improve. It's just it's difficult.
Okay. You ever put too much on your plate?
Yeah.
When you see the lines diverging, you've put too much in your plate.
When they
Stop trying to eat the Whopper.
Okay, what do you mean by diverging?
You see that arrival rate? No, grow that out, Hector, please. You see that arrival rate line and that departure rate line? If those 2 lines look like railroad tracks, that means the flow is relatively smooth. You might still be slower than you could be because the narrower they are together, in other words, the narrower the parallel lines are, the faster your flow. But if those 2 lines are pointing away from each other, okay, that means you're taking on more than you're able to consume. In other words, you're overloading your plate.
Oh.
And this is what I wanted to show here. Thank you, Marcelo. Is, for instance, let's say this line is depicting the arrival rate, and this line is depicting the departure rate. And let's say that this line is whip. So in here, in this example, the lines are diverging. And look at your whip. Your whip is increasing, right? So let's bring the lines closer together, like in this example, where they look closer to railroad tracks. Your whip goes down, right? And in Marcelo's explanation is that when your lines are diverging, you're trying to eat the Whopper as opposed to the chicken nugget, right? The chicken nugget is when your whip is coming down like this. So then work in progress is what the team is signing up to do and work on and commit to. And that's where I'm saying that you can use that as a lever to control whether your lines look like this or whether your lines look like this, right? So very simply put is stop taking on more things and start saying no, right? So that then you can start finishing the things that you've already signed up to do. And I know that's an easy thing to say, but a lot of times, a lot of us are on projects or engagements or initiatives or products that things are always being promised, and saying yes to everything is sort of the norm, right? Mm-hmm. So what do you do in terms of controlling your whip? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yep. One of the ways you do it is you get a smaller plate. You artificially constrain how big of a plate you can fill up. Just get a smaller plate.
Yeah, I had a conversation with business analysts today that are used to shoving work down developers' throats, right? And there's too much in work ready, which was the queue column that developers pull from, and they said, well,
it's a queue. Ooh.
Well, and so they said, well, what do I do, if I'm analyzing something and I can't put it into work ready because that whip limit is full? And I honestly didn't have an answer for them, because as an analyst, it's like maybe they could pick up development or maybe they could pick up some testing, but for sure they're not going to go try developing per se. So it's an honest question. When you start limiting whip, what are the consequences there of the people upstream, and what to do with that?
Yes. Whip limits are not an easy thing to manage, right? But it will help to optimize your workflow. And what's really interesting is Marcelo's point around getting a smaller plate, right? That's sort of like the crux of things. Like how do you then get a smaller plate? What do you do to decrease the size of it?
Go into your Jira project and set the max whip inside of a particular column to a very low number so the column turns red. Freak everybody out tomorrow morning when they come to the next stand-up. What?
Yeah. You get a whip limit, and you get a whip limit, and you
Everybody
get a whip limit.
Oprah.
And what I've been studying recently is that you can have one team that limits the whip fine, but that doesn't actually optimize the upstream and the entire flow, like whatever happens after that team or before that team's work. So you have to really limit the whip before it gets to that team to help even free up and limit the whip downstream, or else you're overloading the entire initiatives, for example, across the entire company.
Yeah, maybe. I would say take Hector's diagram here and apply it across the entire system that you're trying to assess. In other words, across any upstream and downstream, and do the same sort of calculation and see, is the arrival in line with the departure? And if not, then start to investigate and figure out where are you trying to eat the Whopper.
Opening up opportunities for discussion.
Yep.
With the team. What are they seeing? Why are these things happening, right? But they need to see the stuff. You have to actually present the information for them to then sort of analyze it, right? Because a lot of times we say, well, oh yeah, we can talk about velocity, and oh yeah, we should do velocity, but nobody's showing any of the hard data really during, like, say, 16 minutes of the stand-up or something. Nobody's showing any of this data, and no discussion is happening.
Mm-hmm. What'll bake your noodle, Taz, is if you teach them how to do it for themselves.
Yeah,
what?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Crazy, right?
Yeah, crazy. Development teams actually analyzing their own data.
Yeah.
What a shock.
Novel.
Amazing. It's a
really
scandal.
amazing.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
All right.
Do we want to take a picture?
Yeah, for sure. We want to take a picture. Absolutely. Everyone turn on your cameras. turn on your cameras, and I'm
Hold
gonna do the
up.
same too.
Hey, Hector, thank you very
Unfortunately, I
much.
think
It was
Mario
very
got ahead of
Yes,
hand
team,
raised.
thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
This was
Great.
really great.
Yeah,
great
Hector.
discussion.
Yeah, it was great. So
Namaste.
yeah. So
We
okay,
should do
so
a
I'm gonna
whole
go ahead
session
and.
on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go
We
ahead.
should do a whole session on story point alternatives.
Oh, nice.
You mean beard points? It's a
Okay.
thing.
I love
It's a
that.
thing. Maybe I can get that gummy bear guy here to visit.
Oh gosh. All right.